What's up, everybody? Matty Amendola here on SonicScoop.com for Universal Audio to break down a mix in their Luna recording system. If you want to check out how we got to where we are, there's a two-part video series called Recording a Song with Universal Audio here on the SonicScoop YouTube channel, where I cut this whole thing live with an Apollo Solo desktop interface, UA effects pedals, and Luna, all while sitting on my couch in the lounge here at 825 Records. Today we've got the final mix pulled up with nothing but UAD plugins, Luna extensions, the UA effects pedals, and the brand spanking new API Vision channel strip. Alright, I doubt you'll want to continue watching this unless you dig the song. Here it is.
Turn me up, just enough to distort. Turn me on, drop the needle down. Fill me up. Turn me up, turn your ears into eyes. Tune me up so you can see where I hide. Cue me up.
Alright, so before we go track by track, let's check out the mix bus, which is where everything eventually ends up. The first thing we're hitting is the Neve summing extension. And just like I said when we put this on during the tracking session, this immediately made everything feel more like a record. So for me, that's making everything feel just a little bigger, and it's also making the depth from front to back feel deeper. The next thing that we're hitting is the Ampex ATR tape extension. I'm pretty visual when I'm mixing. I'm always, trying to imagine where things are in the image. When I throw a tape machine on, I typically feel like my highs get a little taller and my lows feel a little lower. In my opinion, that's the magic of analog equipment and tape, is this three-dimensional sense of space that we are also getting in the box right now with the Luna extensions. Additionally, we're doing a little filtering at 30 Hz with the curve bender here, and then another classic piece of equipment that I feel like helps that three-dimensional thing is the Fairchild 670. I'm only trying to get a couple dB of gain reduction here. And then last but not least, the precision limiter, just so we don't clip. I think every once in a while it's just taking off 1 or 2 dB. Most of my mix bus processing gets put on pretty early on in the mix stage. That's also when I try to figure out what kind of effects I'm going to want to use for the song. I try to set all that stuff up as early as possible so I can just be creative and I don't have to worry about routing things during my actual session. For effects on this song, you'll see the UA Effects Slap, which, believe it or not, is the UA Effects Starlight Echo Station pedal here. We're also going through the Golden Reverberator, which in the session is titled the UA Effects Plate. I love mixing through guitar pedals. I think that something unique will almost always happen if you just start turning knobs and don't take it too seriously. There's not too much going on the drums and percussion, even though it was a little bit of a puzzle to get them all to work together. We don't have anything on the main loop that's driving the entire song, except for this Studer tape extension here. So aside from a little saturation, I love what it's doing to the low end, and I kind of mixed everything around this loop. In Luna, on individual tracks, you can have either an Oxide tape machine or a Studer tape machine, and you have actually 4 of them that you can use across any track. So what I tend to do is I'll have an Oxide setup that's kind of clean, and then I'll have an Oxide setup that's pretty lo-fi. And I've done the same thing with the Studer, so what we're hearing on this particular drum loop is my cleaner Studer. We added some kick and snare with shape to reinforce the loop, and one awesome thing about the Luna mixer is that we have this utility strip. So as you can see up here, aside from me flipping the phase on this kick drum to work with the loop, I'm also offsetting, time adjusting it, because it felt like it was flamming a little bit with the loop itself. We also added a clap in there during the tracking session, but I didn't feel like we needed any more impact, so I put a reverb on it, made it completely wet, and then ended up using that clap sample as the reverb for the loop. So that's a really cool trick, using another source to create a reverb for something else. I've got the API Vision on there where I'm doing a little bit of filtering. I'm also using the offset here, delaying this by 72 milliseconds. So what I'm doing is actually trying to kind of make a pre-delay happen. I also have this coming in and out throughout the song depending on what's going on in the arrangement. For me, those are like the most important mix moves, when you're just taking things, even if it's just something for a bar, and pulling it out to make room for something else. I'm doing that here before the live drums kick in, and I'm actually just pulling out a single beat. But watch how nicely it sets up that next part, and it makes room for something else. After the tracking session, I did mess around with the live drums, which were MIDI, that I played with an electronic setup. I messed with it a fair amount, parallel compression, the usual suspects, and it just didn't feel as good as what we came up with in the moment. And it makes sense, we did put time into shaping this drum set that night inside of Shape, Luna's built-in sampler. We used one drum kit which was kind of clean, and then we used another drum kit which was kind of dirty, and we blended them until I felt like it felt like a real drum kit. We also have the SSL G-Bus compressor here with a fast attack and a fast release. Without this, I probably wouldn't have been as happy with this drum sound. And you know, it's funny, on even things that maybe some people would consider insignificant, like the end of this tambourine track here. I have this thing panning across the speakers, I'm sending it out to a Lexicon 224 and automating that to swell over at the end. I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole with the VibraSlap. You know, in the tracking video, we got the general idea down, which was a call and response quarter note type thing. And we're doing that with the Galaxy Tape Echo, which is also being EQ'd on both the plugin and with the Cambridge EQ. So that way we have a different tone happening when the normal VibraSlap kicks in and then the affected VibraSlap kicks in. And then I wanted to take this a step further so it felt like it bloomed out of the stereo field a little bit more. So we duplicated that track and I added a bunch of shit onto it. additionally on the percussion, I just have varying degrees of all the effects that we have laid out for us. So the room reverb's being used, the Ocean Way, the Lexicon 224 is being used. This is me just throwing various things, the tambourine, the vibroslap, into some different spaces so they kind of fit inside this image. And then ultimately all of the percussion is ending up going through the API summing extension. So I'm knocking down the headroom so we get a little bit of bite out of it. And, percussive elements going through an API, which I find to be tight, a little aggressive, pointy. I love kind of pushing that into a Neve summing style thing, which is a little bit more gushy and kind of like a warm, comforting hug. So the night we cut the bass, we put a pretty cool chain together. We messed around with the Softube bass amp room, moved the mic around a little bit, really tone shaped what I wanted the amp to sound like. We just were plugged in to the DI, to the high Z input of the Apollo Solo. That night we also had this LA2A doing some work. I added a few more things in there. First thing being the API channel strip. And you don't have to access the whole thing here in this window either. We can open this up right on the mixer, and there it is. All we got to do is slide around our session, and we basically have the channel strip, and we can switch right here between dynamics input section, EQ. We can switch between those EQ types as well, which is really cool. On the bass amp here, we're adding a little bit of low end. I also played around with the filtering, as I often do. We're also adding 100 on a Pultec, as well as some 3K. So the DBX 160, you don't even see the needle moving, but we do see that the threshold is kind of like, what do I do? That's the compressor I turn to when I still want the attack of the transient to almost be even snappier than it was before. It's doing a lot of work for us here on this bass amp track. Another reason why I didn't commit to the amp inside the unison slot is because I ultimately duplicated this track so that we can have a clean DI. So on the DI, I flipped the phase, and then I just played with the low cut. So that was a lot of trial and error of me sliding around that low cut. If we put the amp on with that, we have some really nice control over our low end and then the stuff that's going to help poke through. Let me mute that bass DI on and off. I'm also sending that very thin bass DI sound to a Bermuda Triangle fuzz and an SSL. And what I'm doing is I'm just trying to get a little bit of grit off the fuzz pedal, and then I'm kind of EQing and shaping that, as well as playing with the phase with the SSL. This is great for getting a bass to cut through on a cell phone, on laptop speakers, and this is kind of how I'm doing it here. All of these bass tracks, as well as that bass dirt send, is going to my all bass bus. We're hitting the Neve summing extension, no surprise there. However, I am putting it on the low impedance here and then cranking down the headroom for some grit. Check this out. Additionally, on that bass bus, we're also just adding a little bit of attack with the SPL Transient Designer. Guitars were a breeze because we spent time getting great sounds when we were cutting them. We also did some mixing in that session as well. On this set of stereo guitars, the first thing I did was give it a really nice big low cut. And then a trick that I've been doing forever whenever I spread a guitar left and right is Neve 1073, 3K on one side, 4K on the other side. And there's not much more science to it than that. You just get a really nice musical spread without doing much work. And then we've got an LA3A on each of those, just tightening things up. Other guitars, which are really just little colors, there's not a lot going on this really high one with a lot of reverb, which was all the Golden Reverberator spring setting. We got the Harrison, just adding a little bit of everything. And then again, the most important thing about what I'm doing with these guitars is just straight up pan, balance, and then where I'm sending them. You can see right here, line 7 and 8, that's going to be one of the UA Effects pedals, the Golden Reverberator on the plate setting. We're also doing some spread with the Cooper Time Cube, and these are all kind of being shared with varying degrees of send level to the UA Effects pedals. On the guitar solo, we're not doing much. We are sending to the Golden Reverberator for some plate reverb. We're spreading it out a little bit with the Cooper Time Cube. And then I have the API on, and we're doing a fair amount of EQ here with the 550, and here it is on and off. So we're really just focusing that guy, and I'm also doing a lot with the filtering here on the API as well. The last two bends at the end of the guitar solo I felt like were a little pitchy, and I duplicated the track. I added some auto-tune on there to just straighten out whatever that note was. And then after that, an oldie but a goodie, Dreamverb. And again, this is completely wet. So a little wonky with the pitch correction, but it's actually kind of cool. And we're also, once again, if we go up to the utility strip, we're offsetting this by 108 milliseconds, which means all I did was I'm making a pre-delay, not inside the reverb plugin, which I can also do. I'm kind of doing it on a track level, so I can constantly kind of go back and play with that, and play with how that reverb's blooming out without having to open another plugin. All of these guitars are being summed to an All Guitars bus where I am using the SPL Vitalizer. This thing is just one of those like magic black boxes. I have a hardware version of this, and I usually use it on my guitar bus, and all I did was look over at whatever the last settings were that I used and copy them over to here. Real quick, without going too far in, the tube in this unit sounds great, so before you even kind of move anything around, it sounds really nice, and tubes and guitars play together really nicely. So it does a really beautiful job of pushing anything you put through it outside the speakers while keeping the phase really coherent and solid. You know, mixing something that you've also written, recorded, played everything on, it is difficult. You know, it's challenging to wear all those hats. It's hard to have that objectivity and kind of stand back and hear it for what it is. So I try to give myself a goal, like what is the feeling that I'm really trying to put off in this mix. And I think, at the very least in the second verse, I knew I wanted it to just feel like just on the brink of like exploding, you know. And I knew there was a lot of saturation being used in the song, but that's where I really wanted things to just feel like they were just gonna tear and just go from saturation to distortion. And I think we've all kind of felt that at some point in our lives in the real world. So that's what I'm trying to convey. And I think I think it comes across well in the second verse with this first synth. And then blast off. We're rocking, and you know, yeah. So you know, I try to give myself little goals and for what I want it to feel like, not so much sound like. Later on, we have this crazy fuzz saw synth thing that we spent some time putting together in Shape. Again, I talk about this a lot in the tracking video, but we ended up just using two sounds and spending a lot of time blending them. So ultimately, my goal here was to get that guy working really well with the bass. With the Cambridge EQ on the synth, we're doing something similar that we did with the bass DI, which is we're just getting rid of the low end that the bass amp is taking care of. And then after that, we just have a distressor squashing this thing down and just keeping it a little consistent McNugget of gnarliness. Alright, then the piano tracks in the lead break, which are just single notes, but I did it twice so we could pan them left and right. They're being summed to the Neve summing extension. Let's see what that's doing. We are doing a good amount of EQ with this Cambridge here. And then all of the keys, including that piano bus, are being bussed with the API summing. One of my favorite things about this session was being able to play with the Starlight Echo Station and just get it to feedback like crazy. And we did one pass on it, and it was exactly what I wanted it to be. It was really late in the night. I felt like the camera guy wanted to kill me. And then in the mix, to make even more of a mess, I added this panner, which is set up to only trigger at a certain volume that I tinkered with, and it's going into the Dreamverb, and that's what this sounds like. So yeah, it was a really cool moment. It's me playing with the Space Echo, letting it feedback, going crazy, and then when I hit it off, it kind of hit the golden reverberator, spring reverb, and made a really cool splash. Like that. It couldn't have worked out better. Of course, I did kind of nudge things around a little bit, and I picked the best spots. We also have it as a transition going into the lead break as well. For vocals, I was singing into a Shure SM7B, no cloud lifter or anything. We were going through UA 610B with a healthy amount of gain. We also printed an LA2A on the way in, so the vocals were in pretty good shape. But I did do a lot of work with the API channel strip here, so you'll see a little bit of filtering, not using the dynamic section, but I am EQing a good amount. And then on all the vocals, I'm using the Oxide tape extension.
Turn me up and turn your ears into eyes. And tune me up so you can see where I hide. And cue me up.
We also had this Cambridge EQ from the tracking session, as well as our EP34 tape machine right here for that slap sound that's a majority of the vocal sound. And inside of there, I didn't feel like we needed too much compression, but I grabbed the 176 here, and I really liked how much gain reduction I was doing and how smooth it still felt.
Turn me up and turn your ears into eyes. And tune me up so you can see where I hide.
And then on our sends, I'm sending out to the Cooper Time Cube for a little bit of spread.
Turn me up and turn your ears into eyes.
So I do have the UA Effects pedals printed in the session right now, but I will tell you, when I was playing with the slap and even the golden reverberator as outboard gear on this mix, I was able to get this really, really nice grit and saturation on that slap. So here it is one more time. I'll turn it up a bit.
Turn me up and turn your ears into eyes. And tune me up.
Just the slap.
So you can see where I hide.
Oh yeah.
Cue me up.
And then there is a little glimpse at the end of the throw that kind of goes on after, which I believe is this EP34 kind of regenerating and then going into the cyclosonic panner again to kind of spread it around and get trippy. That becomes a transition into the space noise transition.
So you can see where I hide. Cue me up.
And last but not least on the vocal chain is what I have here labeled as Dirt. And this is a really fun chain. This is the 8-bit plugin here, the Biscuit from Softube and UAD, into a Dreamverb. So what I'm doing is I'm basically just making a saturated reverb sound.
Turn me up and turn your ears into eyes. Tune me up so you can see where I hide. Cue me up.
And in terms of levels and stuff like that, there is a line in here where I say turn me up just enough to distort. When I say the word distort, I had that looped for a few minutes, and that's where I played with how much stuff I was sending into any other thing that was adding saturation. I wanted, when I said the word distort, I wanted it to break up just the perfect amount.
Just enough to distort.
So you can hear that distorted reverb kind of taking over when I say the word distort. That's kind of what I was going for. So same kind of thing going on all the rest of the vocals, except for the fact that they're going to an all-vocal bus where we're doing some summing with the Neve extension, as well as the Ampex tape machine. So let's flip those on and off and see what they're doing.
Turn me up and turn your ears into eyes. Tune me up so you can see where I hide. Cue me up.
Cool, so the combination of the Neve summing and the ATR tape machine on the all-vocal bus seems to be really pushing them forward and in front of everything in the mix in its own unique way.
Turn me up, turn your ears into eyes. Tune me up, so you can see where I hide. Cue me up.
Right, so when I pulled off the summing and the tape, the vocal felt just fine. It was sitting there, it was nice and smooth, it was in the mix, but the second I put them on, the vocal went right in front of everything, which is where I think the vocal should be. Alright, so let's address the elephant in the room, the big question that everyone wants to know. What do I think of Luna? Luna is a brand new piece of software and it feels incredibly fresh, but with that means it might not have everything that you want it to have just yet. With the extensions, it certainly has a sonic advantage over any other DAW in the box, and throughout the span of me working on this project for a few weeks, when I had to go back into other DAWs, they did feel a little antiquated. Ultimately, I would urge you to download Luna and try it for yourself. There is a feedback tab here inside of the software itself to let UA know exactly what you want to see. So I really urge you check it out for yourself and see if it feels as fresh for you as it does for me. Once again, if you dig the tune, there's a 2-part video series called Recording a Song with Universal Audio on this YouTube channel. I had a ton of fun with this project and working with Universal Audio. Don't forget that you can catch any additional information on them at uaudio.com, or if you have any questions, feel free to hit me up in the comments below, or directly on Instagram at Matty Amendola. See you guys soon.